Speaking of the 5G rollout, Josh had mentioned that as being one area of strength for TI. One analyst says chip stocks may be the best way to play the growing phenomenon. Mitch Steves of RBC Capital Markets joins us now. Mitch, great to have you with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
As Josh had mentioned, a lot of companies have some exposure to 5G, like a Texas Instruments, but may not be very concentrated, very strong in those areas. So how should we think about the space in terms of chip company exposure to 5G?
Yeah, so I'd break down the 5G exposure into two segments. The first side would be like the broad-based 5G. So that'd be Xilinx, which is probably the most well-known. They probably have about 20% of their revenues being exposed to 5G. The second one is probably the least well-known of the group is probably Analog Devices. About 12 to 12.5% of their business is going to be 5G, and they've effectively got a near monopoly on it. Essentially, they're going to be in the top 5 players: ZTE, Huawei, Samsung, Nokia, and Ericsson. And all of that, you're going to see the radio content go up by something like 4x. And then secondly, in the other group, I would call the smartphone side. You would essentially have Broadcom, Skyworks, and Qorvo. But the problem there is you don't really know who's going to win. So right now, you're pretty much looking at more on the data center side, which would again be Xilinx and ADI, perhaps some Marvell as well, because they're starting to win some share. And then the last one, which is probably the least well known, would be Keys. That is a test and instrumentation company for 5G, but that's again not as focused on the data center side. So data centers is the Xilinx side, smartphones would be Broadcom, and then the test and instrumentation side is Keys.
I know you don't cover Xilinx right now, Mitch, so I don't want to put you in a bad spot, but I mean, you take a look at the stock and it's up more than 60% so far this year. So how much of that is anticipation that it's exposed to 5G? This is going to be the next big play, and we want to be in Xilinx.
I think a lot of it's actually in there. So actually, I think the better play is to find the 5G items that people are not aware of. So I think that within my coverage universe, Synopsys and Cadence are two stocks that are rarely talked about, but you quite literally cannot make a 5G chip without them. And those stocks are all still going up 40, 50% this year. I think there's a lot more upside for both of them. The second one would be ADI, because as I mentioned and what TI said, they're seeing better growth out of 5G, but who has the most exposure in 5G within the analog group? And it's ADI by a wide margin. So I think those are 2 or 3 interesting stocks. And then Xilinx is just the best pure play, but it's hard to figure out how much is in there considering it's trading at somewhere around 35 times earnings.
So Synopsys, ADI, Cadence, those make the parts that go into the chips needed for 5G. In terms of the other players where you say, we don't know who's going to win yet, Cisco's, Qualcomm, et cetera. When will we know? When is the time to say, you know what, we're on the cusp of knowing and it's time to get in?
So you'll know when the phones start coming out, right? So that's why those are the handset exposed ones, Qorvo's and Skyworks, right? Very heavily exposed to Apple, for example. So once you start to get the iFixit build out of the Apple iPhone or the Samsung phones, you'll know which tools they're using. And at that point, you'll probably see one of the stocks move pretty dramatically. The problem, though, again, on that side is you're really making a bet today on who's going to win.
Right.
Versus if you go to something like ADI or Cadence and Synopsys, you know you're buying effectively part of the winner no matter what happens.